Brian, are you there? Brian, you have to unmute your mic.
You got me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can't see you, but I can hear
Really?
you.
Yeah. Turn you up. I had I have video on.
Interesting. Not sure why that's the case. Me oh, there we go.
Something else is happening.
Yeah, now I can see. Can you see us here?
I see two of you.
Okay. All right. This is kind of an odd arrangement for a conference room associated with Zoom. Thanks for joining us, Brian. I really do appreciate it. So we've just called the meeting to order. Well, I have with me William Lloyd, who's our clerk slash minutes keeper. I have Richard McGrath from the Historical Society. He's the Historical Commission representative. And then Nathan Lockwood, who is a resident within the APD. And that makes up the commission, including myself. We are still looking for another member. So if you ever hear of anybody talking about preserving buildings, give me that person's contact info so that I can
walking in want a demo them, honestly.
So we can extend an invitation to the individual. We have with us also the photographer, videographer, excuse me, from the town, from the PAC, who's going to be recording our meeting as well. So the meeting will be visible on the town's website. One thing I might mention, I discovered today that the town has launched a new look to the website. And there's a couple issues on there, and I've kind of brought those to Kara McCarty's attention, and hopefully some of those things will be fixed. The most notable one for us was that she had two links all going to the Architectural Preservation District bylaw. Unfortunately, one of them was to a link of the bylaw that is out of date. One is the bylaw that is current in accordance with the town meetings. So there's some other things, and hopefully those issues will all get resolved. It's definitely has a different look and a different feel to it than what we've seen before. And I think that it'll be helpful once all the bugs get shaken up. The one thing that I did notice is how the minutes are being kept. Agendas and minutes are being kept is entirely different than what we previously saw. But that brings me to, unless you have some public comment that you'd like to make, Brian, that brings me to the third item that's on our agenda, and that's minutes approval. Any comments from you as a member of the public?
The website is a work in progress, guys. It went live today. Surprising, in between inspections, I had a completely different look. Kara has been working on it, but they pulled in a lot of old information from the original site, and I don't think it translated great in some cases.
Yeah,
they're still working on it.
Yeah, we'll see how that progresses. Hopefully, it'll get better. So at this point, I'd like to have a motion to approve our minutes from the 12th September meeting.
Motion to approve.
Richard McGrath has moved. Is there a second?
Second.
William has seconded. Any comments or discussion about the minutes? I've seen those. I'm with you distributed to the rest of the group. If not, any comments about the meeting minutes from the 12th September meeting? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so those meeting minutes are approved. By any chance, Nathan, were you able to gen up a set of minutes from our 8 August meeting?
I will have those at our next meeting. I apologize. I will have them.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I pulled the transcript and done some things with it. Actually, I submitted it to an AI service to summarize, and but I have to review the results before
Okay.
I submit them.
That's great. I like that idea, using technology to make our jobs easier. And then the other thing I was going to ask, William, have you been able to send the meeting minutes that we have approved forward so they can get posted?
I have not sent them. They're stuck in my Lunenburg email.
Okay.
I'm in the process of trying to re-log into that service.
Okay.
But I do have them saved in there. So.
Okay. If you have any problems, please let me know, and we'll talk to Kara or to Dan about or Suzer IT about getting that result.
But they are saved. There is a historical change.
But I want to get those up for the public record. Those are meeting minutes are really critical in terms of public engagement. The next item on the agenda is correspondence. We get a postcard from Freedom's Way, the National Heritage Area that encompasses Lunenburg. And one of the things that they have here is the opportunity for a reimbursable matching grant of up to $7,500. And you know, when I first looked at this, I thought, I'm not sure how much play we would have in that. But one of the things that I was thinking of is that could we use a program like this to have an impact on one of our properties that we deem to be important, historically significant, where someone might be struggling to pay for some improvements or pay for some maintenance. And, you know, if we engage someone, a private individual, a private property owner, I'm not sure exactly how, you know, the heritage area might look at that application. But I'm going to put this, I'm going to send some thoughts out to you all via email. Once again, an open meeting law requirements. I don't want to dialogue, but just to kind of give you an idea as to what my thoughts are. It says applications will be accepted in awarding on a rolling basis, which means that they'll probably continue to take applications beyond the 1st of October. So we may be able to discuss something at our November meeting and then bring that back to the heritage area. One of the things that I'll do after I send a kind of a summary of my thoughts about this is that I will contact the executive director of the heritage area and see just exactly what their schedule would be for continued applications. The application period opened the 1st of October, and I'm sure that's because of the beginning of the federal fiscal year, and how long they anticipate that they would have money for an application is something that I'll try and get from the executive director. So that brings us to you, Brian. We've had a conversation amongst ourselves about demolition by neglect. And we have a couple of specific buildings, but we wanted to chat with you in general about what you see as being the challenges that we might face to enforce some sort of a demolition by neglect issue with a private property owner. I'm going to start the conversation, but then I want to lob the conversation over to Nathan Lockwood, because we discussed this briefly at our last meeting in September, and Nathan had some ideas as to whether or not there would be some legal steps that we could take because a property is within the architectural preservation district. You know, I know one home that is just a gem of a building, but it's really in dire need of maintenance and repairs. That's on Lancaster Avenue. And, you know, it's privately owned, and the individual is probably struggling to just stay alive and live at that location. But it's a classic example of a house that has significant historical value to the architectural preservation district, but the property owner is pretty much incapable of maintaining the house the way it needs to be maintained. Nathan, any comments that you might want to add at this point in time, and some questions for Brian that he maybe can answer with us?
Sure, yeah, so I'm happy we could either get Brian's thoughts first, or I think the relevant section in the bylaw is this 113-11. Just some background real quick, since we're discussing this, I'll try to keep it brief. So I was on the planning board when we drafted the bylaw. We worked with outgoing planning director Adam Burney in terms of putting this together. One of the major intents of this bylaw was to be a strong protection against demolition that was not, you know, approved by a town body, basically within the architectural preservation district of a history. So it covers historic properties within the architectural preservation district. And so there's a process for actual demolition, and then demolition by neglect is covered as well. And I think, though, to what Anthony is saying, the means of enforcement are not completely transparent to someone unfamiliar with Massachusetts, you know, a deeper familiarity with Massachusetts law and what's at our disposal. so it says for enforcement, it says, in addition to duties previously set forth in this bylaw, the APDC or the building commissioner shall issue enforcement orders with an immediate cease and desist order directing compliance with this bylaw and shall undertake any other enforcement authorized by law. So that's pretty broad. I don't know. You know, I frankly, am not familiar with what the scope of enforcement orders can be. Cease and desist, I can imagine what that might look like, but for demolition by neglect, a little less clear. It says upon request of APDC and the approval of select board, the town council should take legal action on behalf of the town for enforcement of this bylaw or any order issued hereunder in any court of competent jurisdiction. In the case of demolition, including demolition by neglect, without approval of the APDC, no building permit shall be issued with respect to any contributing property within the APD that caused a demolition of its building structure or contributed property for a period up to 2 years after the violation. And then it says the APDC or its designee may use any and all of the aforementioned enforcement methods to address the contributing factors of demolition by neglect for purposes of preventing a contributing property from becoming structurally deficient or economically infeasible to repair. So I think the scope of what that covers in terms of what is, demolition by neglect is pretty well spelled out. I think our real questions are around, what does it mean to be able to issue an enforcement order? And what other means of enforcement are authorized by law in these situations, I guess, whether it's town law or state law. So I guess that's how I would frame it. I guess I just one last thing, when we pass this, it's my recollection, which could be wrong, that our planning director thought that this would provide some meaningful methods for enforcing demolition by neglect. Because we talked about doing some more specific things. He said, no, this is what you need, and this should do it. We've had some subsequent conversations recently on this board about, some softer methods we might be able to use, but would require additional changes to the bylaws. But I guess the conversation tonight, as you're saying, is really what do we have right now in our disposal? And so Brian or Mr. Gingras, whatever you can do to shed light on it, it's okay if you don't know the full scope of it, but definitely we're confident that you will have some valuable perspective on this, if not a complete answer.
So, yeah, the bylaw on paper looks great. I went through the exercise today of reading the bylaw and exactly how you would enforce it. Okay, we don't have a property maintenance code, so you can throw out trying to do it through a zoning violation or anything. What you have is send a cease and desist, which is to cease and desist the disrepair, if you will, in this case, or the violation, which is the disrepair. They're either going to take the letter and say, oh my God, I could go to court or I can fix this, and they have the means to do it. Chances are, from some of the properties I've seen, they don't have the means to do it. Now we're having to go to the select board and see if the town will spend money on town council to go to court to force somebody to do something they can't afford to do. And it's a weird thing. You're going to end up in court. There is no other mechanism, because there is, again, somebody's either going to believe the letter and feel threatened by it and have the means to abate what it is, or they're simply not going to be able to. You're basically coming at them with a stick. I was actually discussing this with Adam today, and it's a rough approach that in most cases probably won't be effective, other than we end up in court and drag it out for a long time. I know Lunenburg didn't adopt the CPA, so CPA funds could be used to help in these cases. Unless you've got a building that's really egregious, like the roof is starting to go. But if the roof is starting to cave in, now we're into the realm of the building code where the building should be demoed. So we got to be careful how we pursue it. So as I said, the bylaw on paper is great, but the only enforcement mechanism is to go into court and spend a ton of money to try to force somebody to do something. Other than sending them a letter, and if they ignore the letter, we don't go to court. Basically, the department becomes a paper tiger. All you're doing is sending out letters that people can ignore anyway. So, again, you got to look at each case separately. But if you've got somebody who's got a house, the paint's peeling, the roof shingles don't look great, they're living in this house alone, they are on a fixed income, there's no forcing them into fixing it. There's only forcing them into selling it, potentially to somebody who's still not going to care. And you're not addressing another issue, which is affordable housing. You're forcing somebody to have a house they could afford to go somewhere else. And then another point I want to bring up, we're discussing these houses. If they're getting to that point of disrepair, they're not going to be cost effective to repair anymore. I think I've mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned anybody on this board, but we adopted new energy code this year that if you got to renovate 50% or more of the building, the whole building has to be brought up to the current energy code. You can't do that on these old buildings. It makes them tear downs anyway. So we're getting into this catch-22. How are we going to handle it? But to answer the question about how you enforce it through the bylaw, you end up in court if they're going to ignore the letter. And in most cases, I don't think they're going to be able to afford to do much. Maybe they can get some, if it's paint we're talking about, maybe get some free paint off of Facebook and slap it on some spots. And you've got a polka dotted house on Lancaster Ave or another location. Before we start chasing people down with letters and enforcement orders, I think we need to find a mechanism to help them fix them first. And then deal with the ones that simply don't care and really want them to fall apart. I just don't know how many of those owners are out there other than maybe a property investor that grabbed it and is hoping it'll fall over.
Right, okay, so this is super helpful. I think, and I hear what you're saying about the unpleasant aspect of dealing it when the homeowner can't afford it. However, I think you've illuminated several things very clearly that were not clear to us before. In addition to, we all kind of understand the issue around folks that can't afford to do the maintenance. And that's understandable. So one thing, the first thing so my reading between the lines here from what you said, the town does have some means at their disposal. The most serious means involve court action. And those are most likely to be effective if the homeowner has the means to address the issue we are invoking. I mean, the last thing you said too suggests that the means that we have are pretty good for dealing with, which was one of the main issues with this bylaw, with dealing with property investors whose goal is, to do something else. They presumably would have money to deal with it, and we have the means to deal with them. So that is meaningful, if not cost-effective enforcement means, basically. Right. I mean, one thing to understand about the historical preservation district is, I mean, cost effectiveness is not irrelevant, but it's not necessarily the highest priority in question either. But I'm really glad you mentioned the thing about the energy code, because that sounds like something we should look into, maybe getting a carve out for historical preservation in relation to the energy code. And not to not take the energy code seriously, but if it becomes a barrier to reasonable preservation, that's something we may want to look at being able to get exceptions for or something.
It's becoming a barrier to affordable housing in general. But when this thing came out, I in all honesty, I think I've only met one of you. I'm talking to from a architecturally significant, historically significant property in Pepperell that I own. It was built in 1780. So I understand what it takes to maintain them. If I were to try to do a complete renovation of this house right now, you couldn't do it. Okay. It would never make it. And that's what I'm saying. So we're getting into a weird realm where the state has adopted things that may preclude full renovation of something that isn't necessarily truly a registered historic property. But it's a topic. It's a completely different topic. Well, right now we're trying to deal with what we can do with enforcement, and that's where you got to be careful with selective enforcement. If we've got, say, we have 3 property investors. You want to, you got these 3 that the houses are in disrepair, but you got another 3 that are private owners. You can't just go after the investors. You uniformly have to enforce this bylaw.
Okay, so so selective enforcement is a problem.
Yeah.
Conflict. So you're saying the conflict is not necessarily with the town's energy code.
It's state.
It's state. Now, is this an opt-in to the state, or is this a mandate?
Well, this is the stretch code, which the town opted into a long time ago. Okay. And it says as of January 1st, a renovation is 50% or more of the existing home requires the whole home to meet the current home energy rating system, which you tell you, you want historically accurate windows and such, you're not going to do it. There's going to be retrofit beyond belief on an older home to try to make it work. These are ratings that a home built last year in some cases don't make. Like I said, it's a whole other conversation. It's an affordable housing conversation. It's a bigger picture problem that the state created by trying to make high efficiency homes.
Okay, well, that's another, I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying. There's probably multiple opinions on that one, but I get what your point. Let's go back to something else you said. So we talked about, so if the person has the money, putting cost effectiveness aside, we have a means to seek redress, that is, take them to court, basically. If the person doesn't have the money, we're in a pickle, but you mentioned something about we could force them to sell the house. Now, you then made
You're
a
not really
comment.
forcing them, but I think the court order forcing them to fix it inevitably would drive them to sell the home. You can't force them out of their home. I mean, it's illegal seizure, I think, in this case. You can talk to town council about that part, but you're essentially driving them out through an enforcement order.
Yeah, which I think,
Yourselves whether that's the right thing to do anyway.
which I think in practice, we want to avoid, and we've talked
Exactly.
about things we might be able to do as alternatives, like you said, adopt the CPI, I think, great point, and then put in something in place that would allow us the town to put a lien on the property in order to execute the repairs or something like that. Something less sticky and a little bit more carroty, but, okay, but I think,
Well, it sounds like we have one particular property here. I don't have the address, but somebody mentioned Lancaster Ave.
yeah, I think let's focus on I don't think this is a hearing today about the specific property, so let's keep it in the abstract. We could talk about different hypothetical properties.
There are a couple properties, Brian, and one falls in the category where they probably would have the money to do the repairs.
Yep.
And the other falls in the category of there's no way that person has the money for the repairs. You know, so it's a look at both. Now, the other piece that's not in it is that I don't think there's an investor involved in the property where they probably have the money. You know, I think they're actually occupying.
Yeah, they're actually occupying. So it sounds like you guys correct me, but it sounds like for the investor situation, we've got the incentives or deterrents in place, I think, to generally drive the right behaviors with an investor, if I understand. So just to recognize the parts of the bylaw that are structured in a way that is sort of workable, that seems positive.
Brian, when you first started talking about buildings, you mentioned something about a maintenance code. The town doesn't have a.
So property maintenance code, right? So it's not really anything you see in
bit
most
about
of
that?
Massachusetts. You do have some towns that have nuisance bylaws that address overgrowth, dilapidated buildings, and there's an avenue there. Lunenburg doesn't have that. Because if you had it and you had it under a zoning bylaw, it's a stick, but it's a less painful one. It's, fines up to $300 a day, things that you could use to get their attention, and you could always waive the fines if they're working on the property. It's not the same as a court order, but again, we don't have any type of nuisance bylaw, property maintenance bylaw, or anything. There's a model code out there, national model code, but I'm not aware of any towns that have in Massachusetts have adopted it. But my previous experience, Woburn in particular, we had a nuisance bylaw, and we had properties like these hypothetical properties that we're talking about, extreme case of disrepair. And in that case, we actually had a volunteer group, and I think they were on national news at one point because a volunteer group got together and helped this woman fix her house. The roof was starting to go, the stairs had fallen off, but a group got together to help fix it because we didn't have CPA there. There was no funds from the town or the city in this case to help. But again, we don't have a nuisance bylaw. I don't have anything that say, hey, you've got extreme overgrowth, you've got 30 days to fix it. Everything with us is we're going to court, we're going to court, we're going to court. Unless it's a zoning violation, which properties don't sound like they are in any way, shape, or form.
That's really interesting. So basically, by adding a zoning bylaw related to this nuisance violation, we could add means to, like you say, add additional pressure to address inappropriate circumstances without having to incur the cost of going to court.
Yeah, but a nuisance bylaw is more general across the town. You don't apply it to just a district, right? You define what your nuisances are, and there's a lot to it. Whether it would ever make it through town meeting, I don't know. Doesn't sound like CPA went through after 3 tries. I don't know a nuisance bylaw would. But again, you can always try. Again, it's a long-term plan.
Yeah.
Again, this bylaw, there's just not a lot of avenues. Everything leads to town council and court if the select board will actually sign off on spending the money to do it, because you still have to present to the select board to go to court.
Got it. That's super helpful. And I love this idea, this volunteer corps, because we were kind of boxed in. You know, we for private residences, even historic private residences, the town is, my understanding, can't just spend money to repair a private historic structure. But this volunteer thing's a great alternative. That's especially if the APDC or the historical committee were to facilitate the formation of this volunteer corps, that might be a great way to, deal with some basic things. It wouldn't cover everything.
We already did that,
Oh,
that property,
that's great. That's the cleared
Few
brush
years
and,
back.
yeah.
fixed the roof.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Richard, do you have any thoughts about the demolition by neglect issue? You've been around a while as well, and you've seen from the Massachusetts Historic Preservation email list how difficult demolition by neglect is to deal with in various communities. Historic preservation can sign up to a statewide, e-list that brings up various topics, and demolition by neglect has been one of those topics that I've seen a lot of dialogue on, and it always ends up being a really difficult one. It depends on whether the owner has the capabilities and whether the owner, has some sort of a buy-in to historic preservation. If they don't, it becomes a real challenge to change the course of direction for that particular structure.
Where we may be a little bit ahead of the game, as I understand it, when we implemented this, was a lot of the towns that are in that bind don't have something like what we have in the historical preservation district. So I think our options are quite different if you go outside the historical preservation district for the same age property or whatever, not in the historical preservation versus in the historical preservation. What the town has at its disposal across its different departments in terms of stopping actual like proactive demolition or demolition by neglect is much different than what we have inside. And I believe that these provisions in the APDC about demolition and neglect give us a leg up over many of these towns you may be reading about, where, despite the problems that Brian has gone through us with, like, there's still a level of tools far above what
They're still
other
thick.
places may have. Yeah, exactly.
Still thick. Yeah. The problem is when I think you have to consistently use the stick. You can't pick and choose who you're gonna send a letter to. It's gotta be uniform enforcement. That's usually one of the first things that any kind of good attorney is gonna bring to the judge's attention if you've been selective about applying, the demolition by neglect requirements.
Right.
So I think that would be one of the things that we have to look at.
Mhm.
But then the other issue is affordability. I think that you can't, look at someone and say, well, they can't afford it, so we'll give them a free ride. I think that's very difficult to do. And even though the investors may have the money to fix up an old building, I think if you're giving others a free ride, they're not gonna take they're not gonna look at that very kindly.
Okay, so I think it sounds to me, I think these are potential issues.
Yeah.
And I think we gotta look at how to kind of address, patch up is not the wrong word, but address these things. And I think there's a lot of great things coming out of this conversation about different patches we could do to different updates we could make to, I think there's different updates we could do to kind of make it more cleanly enforceable. On the selective enforcement, giving us the tools to allow us to enforce in a non-cruel or whatever, way on low income homeowners. That's one approach and probably one I think we should pursue. Absent that, I wonder if there are things we could do to update the bylaw to sort of recognize the problem in the bylaw so that it's not like discretionary differential enforcement, but more like, the bylaw recognizes whereby, people of little means are going to struggle to correct the situation. The APDC, this bylaw reserves the right to
waive the penalty or waive the fee or.
Or essentially apply it to people, exactly, waive the penalty or delay, go in a different, not treat them the same as folks that have the ability to pay. I don't know if that's legal, that's something we'd have to run by, council, but I think the combination of these things, having ways to deal with it, plus being able to avoid it when we really can't deal with it, might help us get there.
Can I make a suggestion here?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian.
Does your commission have access to the monthly town council meetings by chance?
We do, and
Okay.
we haven't brought anything to him, but we
So,
do have, we do have the opportunity to do
My
that.
suggestion would be to run by town council if we could enforce or change the bylaw in such a way that we could also utilize 21D, which is the fines up to $300 a day. That gives a lot more discretion in my office, that we send a notice, and if an owner responds saying, look, okay, I want to take care of this, I need 60 days, we can give them the time and stay the fines. Again, it's a lighter weight stick that could become more of a carrot, if you will,
Right.
before you then have to take the actual court action. It's an idea. It's a thought. It kind of goes along that nuisance regulation where it was enforceable by zoning instead. But inserting additional language that you've got these enforcement options, but under demolition by neglect, certain conditions could also be a trigger for a 21D enforcement or 21D fines, if you will. Yeah, it's something to talk with town council about. I'd gladly go to the town council appointment with you guys if you want to talk about it. It's an idea. Again, it may be something more palatable at town meeting. Maybe, I don't know. Kind of have to weigh what people actually approve too. So
Yeah.
That's really interesting and valuable, Brian. Question on that. So just to make sure I understand what you're saying, this 21D, you're saying that you're not suggesting that there's already, the council might say, oh yes, you could do this right now based on the existing structure of our bylaws.
there isn't, this bylaw is not under zoning. I have certain enforcement ability that I can utilize through zoning, and I believe a couple of the sections of the bylaw that reference 21D. That 21D, so say somebody puts up a shed over the weekend on their side lot line, and I get a call from a neighbor. I go out, yes, that's the line. You know what, they're in violation. I send a notice. You have to have a 5-foot or 15-foot side setback. Your accessory structure is in violation. You have 30 days to abate the violation. Otherwise, it's to avoid additional enforcement action, including a fine of $300, a fine of up to $300 per day per violation. And it's one way to do it, but you need to have the language empowering that enforcement first. I can't just say, you know what, their roof is, shingles are coming off and their paint is peeling. I'm going to send them a notice that I'm going to utilize a 21D violation because I'm not empowered under our bylaw to use that. And the question is for town council, whether or not we can legally work that in within just the district.
Into just the district. Okay.
Because it's selective to just one area. So it's a little bit more of a complicated conversation. Something I'd love to have with him if somebody from your commission wants to go in on an appointment with him, at least get the conversation going and see if there's some way, because then from there we can work on rewriting this section of the bylaw, and I'll gladly bounce drafts back and forth with you guys to figure it out if we can do it.
We'll do that. We'll do that. That's a great suggestion, Brian.
It's a lighter weight stick. It's not just running to court where I don't know what the select board's going to say. Here's a blank check to go make somebody paint their house. That may not go over so well all the time.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so, so just to be clear though, you don't think like the stuff that's under enforcement in the bylaw now is enough to allow you, even in the best of case when the lawyer says, yeah, theoretically you could do that, but you don't think the trigger language is there in the current bylaw to allow us to potentially use that now?
I'd get thrown out of Fitchburg District Court if I issued that and somebody appealed it, because it goes to district court in that case. Okay. I'd get thrown out. I don't have a legal pathway to write that ticket right now.
Okay, so you can't do it as a violation of the APDC, basically, is what you're saying? Okay,
It
got
just,
it.
it's not there.
Got it.
The language just doesn't exist. Other sections of our bylaws specifically state 50, 100, 150, 200 per day violations under 21D. This one, there's just nothing there.
Got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. And just to be clear to the public watching this meeting, our goal in all of this is not to, go out and aggressively, fine and punish townspeople for things. It's just really finding a way to make sure that we have the ability to, without excessive cost to the town, when we need to enforce this bylaw that is here to enforce, to see that the town center's architecture is preserved in a way that was desired by the town and passed by town meeting. So I just want to be clear, because we're talking a lot about penalties, but it's not because we get excited about penalties. We get excited about just, having something so that when we're trying to achieve the town's goals, people can't just wave us off and ignore us, because then the law becomes ineffective. These tools are valuable so that we can do the town's work on behalf of the town, basically. So that's all.
Well said, Nathan. Okay, any other comments about this particular subject?
No, I think.
Richard, anything else? Hey, Brian, thanks very much. Some good dialogue, good suggestions. You're more than welcome to continue to stay with us, but you've accomplished, with your participation, what we were looking for from you. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
I'm gonna get some kids in bed. I'll see you guys later.
Okay, we understand that completely.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Brian.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Okay, that was very helpful. I'll take on the task of trying to find out what the town council schedule is. Elaine sends those out. I've been ignoring them. Now I'll go back and look and see what times we have. She gave the schedule for, I think, through the end of the calendar year, and I'll have to go back and talk to her about when we might schedule a meeting. And then I'll let you all know when the meeting is, and then if you have time you want to join us, fine. If not, then we'll proceed. It sounds like Brian wants to be a part of that conversation. I think it is something, we've talked about there's no way we were going to do any changes to the bylaw for the November meeting, but maybe this might be an item for the annual town meeting in May. But I still think that finding money like, grants and maybe the CPA, and creating a pot that gives the town some money to provide folks who can't necessarily afford this, a way to preserve their house, and then maybe, a way to incentivize someone who can't afford it by paying part of it. I mean, I think there's all kinds of ways of protecting the interests of the town, both from the standpoint of preserving the historic structures, as well as preserving the town's financial commitment to that. I mean, I think there's ways of saying, hey, if we give you money, you want this back in return, as a benefit to the town. So, all right. Any other comments about demolition by neglect? Let's move to our old business. Actually, I have one other item under current business, which isn't on the agenda, but which I saw yesterday. We approved the renovation restoration work at the town hall, I think last spring. And one of the conditions was that we wanted to see what the cost would be to restore the chimneys versus eliminating the chimneys. Our approval was conditioned on that. And the town did finally get a bid on this project, which I think was originally estimated, the appropriations, I believe, were about $70,000. The one and only bid came in at $300,000, which doesn't surprise me.
For the whole project.
Yeah, for the whole project. Originally, it was estimated at like 70,000. That's what was a little less than that was appropriated at a town meeting, I think, in 21. So I think that's an indicator of a couple of things. One is what I'm very concerned about the Ritter building, because they haven't put that up for bid yet. But if a $60,000 or $70,000 project came in at $300,000, it's going to be very interesting to see what the handicap ramp and the exterior renovations, which we approved the CTA last week to see what those come in at. I mean, I think that's gonna be something that is, and I've been saying this, I don't think there's enough money in that project. And of course, the fundamental issue with that is that we have a very old historic structure that's in dire need of maintenance, and, that needs to happen. But one of the things that was in the language of, the summary related to capital improvement projects was that, the facilities manager, Chris Ruth, is now going to focus on doing this in phases, and the first phase is gonna be the chimneys. So, I'm gonna, with your concurrence, I'll go ahead and talk to Chris and ask him to report back to us what that phase would look like, since we had made that part of our conditional approval of the CTA last year, just to make sure he's aware that that was in the CTA language that we gave to the town in the spring of 2022. I think it's gonna be it's an indicator, it's a canary in the mine of what we might face with the Ritter building.
So when they're putting these things out to bid, you said we got one bid on
Yeah.
Cardinal.
Mhm.
How, are we just posting it for bidders? Are we able to go proactively?
I have no
I mean,
idea.
it seems like if I had to do anything at my house and I called 5 people, probably 2 or 3 of them would at least call me back to talk to me about, you know what I mean? I don't know, it just seems like awfully, I'm wondering if this,
I think Nathan, that, that the town has a whole slew of regulations that are, created by the state as to how municipalities are select bidders and get bids
Yeah.
for projects.
sure.
So,
There's probably some open source place that they put it out there and
Yeah.
people can.
It's published and then whoever wants to bid on it.
yeah,
Sometimes nobody bids, everybody's busy now, so
right.
you get one bid and they throw out a highball.
Yeah.
Mm.
So 2 issues there. One is, make sure Chris knows that we had a condition in there about the chimneys. And then secondly, the potential impact of preserving this historic structure. All right, now moving on to old business. Any other questions, comments about town hall for the project? I did attend the first steering committee meeting of the master planning process. It was, it's an interesting committee. It's huge. It's got 15 members on it. And as a result, we waited almost a half hour for a quorum to form. We needed eight members. And so we sat in the Bellata meeting room for almost a half hour waiting for the 8 members to show up. There was only 1 member of the public at the meeting, in person, that was me, and then there were a couple of folks who were attending the meeting via Zoom. The committee is gonna be headed by, I think her name is Josie Gilchrist. I don't know her, I don't know whether you know her or Nathan. And she agreed to accept the responsibility as the steering committee chair. I had an interesting conversation with the consultant, 3 days later. I sent him an email that was, that expressed my personal opinions and my personal views, and basically to convey that I hope that they will look at the historic issues associated with the central district, particularly the village district / APD, along with, structures within it, Ritter, Town Hall, the Brooks House, and some other places. It's an interesting consultant, company's called Over Under. They've done work locally, close to us in Ashburnham. They've also done work internationally in places like Saudi Arabia and Emiratis and United Emiratis. And, so they have a nice mix of experiences. I will continue to follow the steering committee's process. They're gonna have a website supposedly up and running that will allow town residents to provide input into the master plan. So I would encourage you to look for that. And then I asked the consultant if they were going to survey passively or survey actively. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, survey passively is you just, say, hey, tell us what you think, fill out this form. Versus actively is that you create a sound statistical basis for asking the questions. You ask a certain number of questions, you ask a certain number of people, and then you have some degree of mathematical certainty that this is what the town wants to do. I consider that to be an active survey process. He said that he did not know if they were gonna do that, but I'm going to, at every step, encourage them to take that kind of an approach. So, any other questions about the master plan?
What's the defined mission?
Come up with a 10-year master plan. For the
That's it,
town.
there's no details under that.
Well, I haven't looked at the statement of work, Richard. You know, the planning board's been responsible for crafting that statement of work. And I do know that, from speaking with some of the members of the planning board, they want the plan to be valued. You know, they're interested in getting something that can guide the town's development for the next 10 years. I think that was one of the reasons why they created a steering committee, which is huge. You know, I don't know why we weren't, or the historical commission was not asked to participate. But I think that there needs to be a voice for historic preservation, not only for the APD, but as well as for the town as a whole. So we'll continue to monitor that. And that was one of my personal comments that I made to the consultant, you know, is that this is an old town. It has old history associated with it. We're getting ready to celebrate our 300th anniversary, and the plan needs to reflect that. All right. Okay, I talked to the town clerk about our desire to send out a mailing, and she waved me off. She says, go talk to the assessors. They'll help us with that. So we'll continue to pursue that. But what I wanted to share with you tonight, I actually worked on this today, and I thought, well, I'll just bring a hard copy, but I will email you a copy so that you can make some notes and some suggestions. If this is kind of a draft, I like to work in outline form. You know, when I do something that's eventually going to lead to a document that has multiple words. The other thing about a brochure is that brochures should be sweet, short, to the point, you know, so I think it kind of lends itself to at least a bullet outline as a starting point. And this is, you know, William and I can relate to this, I'm sure. The old white papers go no more than one page, right? William? So, but the commission wants to produce a brochure, and this is kind of my ideas as to what the brochure should convey. And the bullets would turn into maybe another sentence or two at the most. But, you know, what I want to do is I want to have words on one page and then pictures on another page, you know, so that they can get an idea. You can make comments now, or we can talk about this in more detail as we get to our November meeting. But if you want to just kind of run through it, I wanted to say, you know, I looked at the National Register Historic, Lunenburg's National Register Historic District nomination. And while the overlay for the Architectural Preservation District / Village Districts is not a perfect match, because property lot lines have changed over the years since that was approved. But it's pretty close. The National Register map is pretty close to what the APD is. And there's a lot of information in the National Historic Register district nomination that should be communicated to the residents who live in this district. And I one of the things that I look for on the Historic Commission webpage yesterday was whether or not the register, you have the link, there's a link to the National Register nomination itself, the actual PDF file that the National Park Service has on its record, in its record base at the National Archives. And there is not a link. There was not one yesterday. I didn't look today since I got confused by the new town website. But I think that either on the Historic Commission website page or our page, and I think it actually is more appropriate for our page, we need to have a link to that nomination, because it
should be on the Apdc.
It has a lot of information about all these structures, and I think that it'll surprise people when they see the addresses and go, "Oh, I didn't know that." You know, now a lot of people do. You know, folks like our former chair, Colin Dwyer, he knows he lives in a national, registered house, and I think that there's a whole bunch of other people that do but don't know. And I think that would be really key for us to communicate.
Yeah, a lot of them don't have plaques.
No.
Noting that.
You know, structures over 75 years old, in Ohio, we said structures over 50 years old. I'm not sure why it's 75 years in Massachusetts, but that's another important point, which, by the way, if you look at TC Passios, we're at 70 years and counting on TC Passios. If the Lunenburg Municipal Building Design Committee doesn't do something soon, it's gonna fall into our laps because of the 75-year timeline. The building didn't get named TC Passios until 1963 or 66, but it was, it was commissioned as a school in 1953. The property, and what I think we really need to do is we need to encourage property owners that come to us before they think about doing something. I wish that we had been successful in getting that done with the town with regards to the Ritter building. And I think that the more that we can communicate to owners that we're here to help them, not drive them nuts with historic preservation requirements, the better off everybody's going to be. The better our life will be as commission members, the better the time will be in terms of saving historic structures. And the same for our property owners. One of the things that I think that, and Brian touched a little bit on this, is in the energy code. Windows are windows, and windows will always be a place where energy flies out. Whether it's a brand new Pella window or an Anderson window, or whether it's a window that was built in 1793 and now is a storm window on top of wavy glass, is that windows lose heat, and it's always an issue. And I think sometimes if people look at new windows and think of them as being infinitely better than an old window, but when you look at an old window that's properly maintained with a storm window, you're pretty close to the energy loss for that window. And I think that shocks most people when you tell them that. But those are the types of things that we can discuss with them. Same thing with regards to roofs. Now, nearly everybody who had a slate roof probably has seen them go by the wayside, which is really an unfortunate situation, because a slate roof can be maintained, and if it is, it will last years beyond what the conventional roofing materials that we put on houses
Hundreds
today.
of years.
Yeah, hundreds of years. That's exactly right. So, the other thing that we got to make sure, and I was surprised to see the ad for a new land use director in the Lunenburg Ledger last week. But we got to make sure that we continue to have a strong. I'm assuming that the Apdc at lunenburgma.gov is coming either to Adam or coming to Aubrey, because it isn't coming to me. So we got to make sure that that's being monitored and that it's being looked at. And if do we have somebody out there that has, question or comment, and they use that website, that it's not, or that use that email address, that it's not ignored.
Mhm.
And then,
Somebody's gonna be checking, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not,
I'm not either, so yeah.
Cause usually distros like that, they can make it so if they email that email address, it would go to the four of us.
yeah,
Which would be ideal.
Yeah.
because then it doesn't rely on whether Tony looked at his email today, So that's one of the, and that was one of the issues that I was looking for when I got on the webpage today. Well, wow, this is all different. This is crazy. There's some inconsistencies in here. So,
Yeah, I didn't receive any notice of the historical commission.
So real quick, you mentioned Adam, just to, my understanding from the select board meetings that, Adam stepping down and taking the jobs, that they're probably gonna be hiring someone to be there. Just wanna make sure everybody was aware of that.
yes, like I said, I was shocked to see the ad in the Lunenburg Ledger, advertising the position being open. But that's critical for us because he's our staff contact. We need to make sure that whoever comes in is aware that we exist, what our mission is, that we have a good open line of communication. So then I said, I want a map of the district. William, you have your questionnaire. I'd like to get that onto this document. And then photos of select historically preserved structures. Like Collins House is beautiful. There's a house right at the edge of the district as you're coming up I think it's Leominster Road. It's a kind of a dark purplish maroon colored house. It's beautiful. It's a well-maintained structure. Has storm windows, you know, the house is just magnificent as an example of what you can do with an old house. You know, so those are the kinds of pictures. And then, you know, I don't want to show anything, I don't want to show a house that's, you know, it's neglected. That's not what this is all about. It's to inspire people to want to maintain their houses the best way possible. So I will email this to you all, and then you can mark it up, edit, add to, and then we'll discuss this again with the intent of bringing this to a printer, you know, so that we can mail it out before the end of the calendar year.
So you're gonna come up with the actual example
Yeah,
of the brochure
yeah, yeah,
with the photographs?
yeah.
And you're gonna mail it within the district, basically?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah, because that's really where we only have authority, you know, I don't want, you know, like somebody who lives, you know, like on Northfield, a nice old historic house and says, hey, you know, what can you guys tell me about how to do my windows, you know, how to do my roof, you know, we certainly would welcome a dialogue with them, but we don't have the authority to do that. So, okay,
One other thing on these topics, in the past, the APDC had discussed, having, informative signs at particular historic sites in the district, such as the Lower Common, where Minutemen, mustered to go to Lexington, so having that on a sign with the history of it, as well as, perhaps the town pound, with the history of the town pound, being, voted to build it in 1764, and how that came about, and other sites in town to inform the people that live in the district, as well as people that pass through the district, of the historic significance of this place, which I think is often lost in the busy day-to-day hustle and bustle of everybody. I think that makes a difference and it educates people of the value of the district and maintaining it. And then also we had talked about a brochure with a walking tour. Previously, I think the elementary school or junior high had a walking tour every year when they were studying Lunenburg history. They would go around to the different, the town pound, different sites and significant houses. If there was a walking tour brochure that pointed out people that could go for a walk through town and point out the different architectural significant places. And different history, and then if you had historic markers, that would be part of it.
Neat.
It would also generate people moving around in the town rather than just driving through.
you think the historical commission would work with us on that project?
In what way?
Well, coming up with the details of the historic structures, why are they, you know?
Oh, yeah, it would be better to ask the Historic Society.
Okay,
They have all the information.
okay, all right. You know, markers, signs, you know, let's say you're in Lunenburg and this is our history. That's a great program. But really hard to execute.
In what way?
Well, first of all, you gotta have a wayfinding approach, you know, you gotta have, you know, like, for this to be successful, this is one of the things that I've done on multiple occasions. And, whenever you talk about putting up wayfinding signs and signs that mark different places, it generates a huge amount of controversy, believe it or not. And then the other thing is, it's pretty expensive to do signs, you know, even like, you know, there's a whole range of inexpensive signs that last a year, expensive signs that last 15 years. And signs beyond that, you know, life of a sign beyond that is generally not available, which then means that you have to have a program to continuously maintain them. I think it's a great idea.
Well, there's lots of signs I've seen that are bronze and they're dated into the early 20th century.
Right, no, those signs are long lived, no doubt about
Yeah,
it, but then they're also expensive,
yeah,
so,
yeah, quality
Yeah.
costs less in the long run.
yeah, it does. Yeah, but I think it's another great idea, so we'll add that to the list of things to
And it
do.
doesn't always have to be all at once, it's, you have a budget to
Piece
do
at a time.
annually, and it could be done over the years as an ongoing project.
You know, I think maybe, I made a note to myself, since I'm on the 300th anniversary committee, and we've been talking about various things to do. And talking about, how to engage the town with the town cemeteries for the 300th anniversary. But a walking tour might be a great 300th anniversary project,
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
So I've added that to my, I'm gonna
And
bring
that
that,
it would be a project to, for CPA funding too, would
Yeah.
also, take up half that cost
yeah,
and get a lot done. One of the, members, Kevin Bousson, on the, Historical Commission, had come up with the idea of having markers where things aren't anymore. So, a marker in front of this building with a picture of the Revere House and what was here and the history of that tavern. Things like that add to the dimension of the town, what was here before and what's here now. It adds a whole new dimension to,
maybe what we'll do is that, not at the November meeting, but maybe, at the January meeting, is that we'll devote our commission meeting to looking at the historic nomination and figuring out how to identify and communicate the historic resources that generated that approval of that nomination. And kind of pick through the things that we look at or see and say, this is something that still exists. This is something that we should communicate to the residents, to the citizens of the town of Lunenburg as to why it's in this nomination. And that becomes the basis for the markers and signs program that you're talking about, Richard. What do you think of that idea?
yeah,
The nomination's 100 pages long. And, so there's a lot of meat in it, a lot of details in it. Any other comments about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's really neat. I want not to be too tech focused here, but I wonder if there's an opportunity. I mean, the Historical Society has incredible documentation of some of the historical information about the properties and whatnot. I'm wondering if there's some, and this is not something I play with a lot, but I wonder if there are some easy ways to start embedding this historical information in places that'll be more easily accessible to folks. For example, like Google Maps or whatever. Like, I think there might be a way that you can submit, like, in some layer, like, oh, these are historical places in the town, and people on their phones, as they're near something, you kind of see, oh, there's something historical, they click it and they see something that can take them to a web page, which could have more description. There may be other apps other than Google Maps that are dedicated to this, but I wonder if that would be an interesting project. For this Historical Society, maybe collaborate with like Lunenburg High School students to get them, turn them loose on the incredible information you got, the Historical Society's compiled, but then, this isn't stuff that I think there's probably tools out there that don't require like a ton of programming and stuff that teenagers could dig into. And they might do some interesting.
You can definitely create custom maps in Google. I'm just curious, I don't know what the limits are. I think after a certain amount of data or space, you have to start paying them, to use their server space to maintain it. But there is definitely a way, because we have one at work where we have all our offices in a Google map. So I could email you and you could bring it up and I'll show where every office is, the address, the name of the guy there, and you can just click on it and say, drive to me, and just jump in your car and go. So it's definitely something we could do. Another piece of technology, and there's a fine line between historical and trying to grab the youth of the younger generation, But if we're looking at signage, maybe some type of, not bronze, but another temporary sign with the scan codes.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for the kids, where they can go up, scan the thing, it shows a picture of the building, when, you know, the historical photos of the building, they can scroll through their tablet or device and.
So they could dig deeper
Mhm.
inside. Yeah.
Cause I mean, usually the bronze things are only so big,
Sure.
sure, that, then you could link it to the historical database and pull more information and.
That's really cool. Yeah, and create some sort of web presence, you know, like imagine taking the red book for Lunenburg and like, you know, giving the high school kids a project to get that up on a website. There's website tools that allow them to create that pretty easily. And then use your QR codes or your geolocation and link to it.
Yeah,
So that people, you know, they don't have to like go to the historical society, get the book, have the book, like anywhere they are, if they wanna know more, like, boom, like right into your material.
you could have a scavenger hunt on there.
That's what I was thinking of
Find
for
the
the kids.
Oh,
bird
this is-
site.
yeah.
Yeah. Cause I mean, the teacher could be like, oh, well, what house was founded in 1732? It was originally plum and color. You know, like, oh, I remember that, that was over on Lancaster Street, and when they run over and the next clue is there, and,
Yeah.
I mean, the teacher could definitely have fun with it.
I'd like to play.
I think you'd win.
Cool.
Good discussion. I'm gonna figure out a way to take our comments and generate that into a work plan for us. So,
Yeah.
not just that, I mean, like, one of the thoughts that came to mind, William, was, my grandson's taking civics at, in 8th grade, and that's a great place to start if we're gonna try and get kids and teachers engaged, you know, so. I don't know who his civics, teacher is, but I know that he likes her, so maybe that'll be my way of enticing her to help.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to start taking it from idea to actualities.
Yeah.
You know, have a talk with some of the teacher, civics, history, whatever.
Yeah.
And get sort of a champion in the school.
Yeah.
Who can help, you know, kind of build out the participation.
What grade was the walking tours?
I don't remember, it's something between 5th and 8th grade.
Okay, all right, so I'll figure out a strategy to get that on the agenda so we can actually get something done. Any other comments about our old business? We talked about the property owner notification, the brochure. We haven't discussed anything about changing the certificate to alter application of the guidelines, but we gotta get some work done on that, particularly for the certificate to alter. I want that to be a digital product. I don't want it to be a paper product anymore, so. Any other comments for the meeting tonight?
I received at the historical commission, some questions for a real estate agent. Someone was interested in buying the Harley House property down here. I don't know the number of the house, but,
That's the one next to the gas station, right?
yeah, I think so. And they were inquiring, because it was in the architectural preservation district, what extent could they make repairs on the house? Did we rule over color and everything they were asking? We had no jurisdiction over, so I said that they were free to do whatever they wanted in those on those matters, and to check the website for the Apdc rules and regulations.
You know, it's gonna be interesting to see how the town develops that property where the gas station was. You know, they're working through I saw where they've gotten rid of the barrels and some of the soils. And eventually, you know, all the fencing is gonna come down, the building's gonna get demolished, but it's a very small parcel. You know, like, it doesn't suit itself for a house, it doesn't suit itself for a business, because it's only 0.19 acres. And I don't know how I mean, the only way that's gonna become something viable for commercial application is to either have the property owner that's adjacent to it on the east side say, I want it, and then they can use their existing property for parking and traffic and all that. or the person who owns the house on the west side of the property. Now, and I think that's where the Harley house is,
Yeah.
correct?
Mhm.
So that may be one of the things that's going on, that someone's thinking down the road, that they would buy the Harley property and then eventually maybe take control of that 0.19. Because like, if you look at the map, it's a small little piece. It really is.
Does the town own that?
They did.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, as a result of the cleanup. So, okay, our next meeting will be the 14th of November. Does that work for everyone? I actually have an earlier meeting that evening. It starts at 5 o'clock, and I will use that as my excuse to say, we're done talking. Because I gotta go to my meeting at 7:30. All right, if there's no other comments or discussion items, I'll entertain a motion to.
Motion to adjourn.
All right,
Second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.